On today's show, the Bucks defense returns to form impressively against the New York Knicks. And oh, by the way, Damian Lillard remains very, very good at basketball. We'll discuss the Bucks weekend on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia. She's Camille Davis. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Camille, really two places to start with what we saw Friday night in all things considered an impressive win against the Knicks. And before we do get into what we saw from the Bucks in that game on both ends of the floor, it was our first taste of the in-season tournament. So did it feel any different to you, any added motivation, or it was, I think Dame put it best, we know it's something, we just don't really know what that something is yet.
I think Dame summed it up perfectly. I love what the league is trying to do with, adding something into the regular season. A common critique you hear about the NBA season one is that, it's too long. Games don't matter until after Christmas, so on and so forth. And there are a lot of people who, before we even saw anything about the in-season tournaments, who were just kind of like, well, what's the point? What are we playing for here? Is money really enough for these players if every player is getting, some funds for winning? And we're not sure how this is going to go. I mean, this is the first time the NBA is implementing this. We know they're taking the idea from soccer, which has a whole other set of level of regulations and things that go into their in-season tournaments. But for a start, you can tell it was different. The court in itself was, wow. The Bucks court, I know there were some people who were unsure of it with that bright lime green stripe going down it, but after seeing some other courts, I have to say that I am thankful that the Bucks went with mostly a cream court with that lime green. And I thought the jerseys actually looked pretty good on that court. It felt different. I mean, the game in itself was exciting. It came down to the last few possessions. So when you have a game like that, it already built up that anticipation, and it just feels different. And again, first time you're seeing courts, first time you're seeing certain jerseys. I like the unrolling of it. And if you're an NBA junkie and you're going to watch the games anyways, it's just a different visual treat for your eyes at this point. But I do think once they get to Vegas, and I believe we talked about this last week, it's going to feel like something. We are still unsure as to what that something is, but my early view on it is that it's going to be fun. It's something different for every Tuesday and Friday throughout the month to look forward to. Oh, this game is, an in-season tournament game in addition to accounting for the regular season standings. It counts for pool play and it counts for this tournament as well. So just seeing how that unfolds. I mean, I like that the NBA is trying different things. And if it doesn't work, they can just go back to how it was. But right now I'm having some fun with it. How about you?
I mean, I had no complaints, especially that the Bucks won. But yeah, I think as we progress further and further along in this, it's going to be more interesting. And the big thing for me is I keep comparing it to the play-in tournament that I was skeptical of that as well when it first rolled out, and it was much different. That was what you had to be within 5 games of the team or something like that. That we only had one the first year, just the Western Conference. I think fittingly that was Dame and the Blazers against the Memphis Grizzlies. And we saw how much that's evolved, and now the league will tout that as a success because you had a finals representative and a Lakers team that reached the conference finals to come from the play-in tournament. So I think it's going to be similar to that, where it's going to keep evolving. And the more it's in our lives, the more we see it, the more you get used to seeing whoever wins the first one hanging a banner that says NBA in-season tournament champions. We'll just accept it as though it's something that we've had all along. Speaking of something, though, Brook Lopez was more than something. And so the Bucks practiced Thursday prior to this game on Friday. And it was a long practice because we were told media can arrive at, I think it was 1:30. And it was me, Eric Name, Jim Ozarski, and Steve McGargy of the Associated Press sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. And I don't think players were made available until 4:30. So you were just waiting, looking at your watch, thinking, well, man, either there's a lot of conversations taking place right now, or they are still practicing. And I think it was a mixture of both. As we heard from Griff after the game, he may have tipped his hand a little bit too when he said a couple of players and then slipped in Chris and said, sorry, not Chris, a couple of players approached me and said, look, we got to play Brook Lopez in the drop defense. I know you and Frank talked about that quite a bit. And Frank had some even more pointed takes on how much Brook was maybe embracing the prior defense under Adrian Griffin. But we definitely saw a change. So that's a big takeaway. And I think, look, a great sign in that game early on was we saw Brook Lopez called for 3 seconds, a couple of minutes into the game, which you thought, okay, this should mean something here. He blocked 8 shots. By my count, he was around at least 11 of those, where I know he had one goaltend and he was close to a couple others. It was markedly different. And I think that's important to get the Bucks back to some level of comfort as they assimilate some of these new things. But my takeaways, and I'm curious to hear what you think, were more about Griff after the game and how he handled that and what he said the exact process was of players came to me, players said, look, we got to do this. I'm smart enough to know I don't always have the answers and I got to listen to these guys. But the thing that struck me the most was we thought this could be something when he arrived, saying, I think one of the benefits is I can relate to these guys as a former player. But he added, look, a lot of times as coaches, you have to listen to the players because we can scheme things, but ultimately us, you as the fans, whoever, we're watching this in film. And the players are going through this in real time, that they're in the trenches, that we may think, I don't know why this isn't working, or this should be the answer here. And it takes the players coming to you and saying, look, I understand why you did this, but actually this is what's happening and this is why we need to change. So 5 games in for Adrian Griffin to go through 14 interview processes to finally get this job, it could have been easy for him to say, look, I'm the coach. This is my system. This is what I want to run. I don't want to start to bend this early because then maybe I'm not going to get to run it my way. But for him, 5 games in to say, all right, this is what you guys want to do. We're going to do this, but we're still going to do some of my stuff. But I trust you guys to kind of handle both.
Like you mentioned, you love to see something like that. At least I do. I did see some people who were trying to spin this into a negative, that he listened to his players' feedback and made an adjustment because of that whole notion of I'm the coach, it's my way or the highway. And it's like, do we want another Jason Kidd here? We saw how that works where you don't have any bend at all in the system. I'm not sure if players went to him at any point, but with this team being a championship core here with Giannis, with Chris, with Brook, they know how they play at this point. And we mentioned it early, even during media day, when Brook was mentioning the schemes, and he goes, yeah, it's quite different. Like I'm further away from the basket, and this is kind of different, but we're going to see how it goes. And I thought that the first couple of games, it's like, are we just trying things out to see where guys can be? Because this is a head coach, first-time head coach who's coming in and mostly inheriting a team, a couple new pieces, but the core of it is really the same here. Is he just trying to see what these guys can do in his scheme, or is he dedicated to running this at all costs and he'll make roster, changes based on his scheme and his scheme alone, which seemed like it would be in contradiction to we just brought back Brook Lopez, paid him a lot of money to come back, and we know what he's really good at, where he thrives. So let's move him away from this. So to see that after 4 games and looking at the returns, looking at the film and saying, maybe we're not utilizing our personnel in the best way right now with this particular scheme if he's out there. I love that he made that change, and we saw immediately how effective that change was for this team, for Brook Lopez to be back in that drop coverage, trying to, protect the rim. And he did. I mean, 8 block shots. He only had, I think, 2 in his first 4 games. Yeah. So like it's, you see that this is where he thrives. And I have no problem with Coach Griff trying to have maybe Giannis play that more aggressive scheme. I think it's really interesting to see how that'll go if he's going to commit to having all the bigs playing drop. But I don't think it's going to go that way just based on Griff's history and his willingness to change things in game. So if he can just match schemes based on personnel a lot more closely, I think that's a win. And I don't see any problem with him getting feedback from his team. It's a whole collaborative approach right here with this Bucks team where, hey, we're seeing things too. And as you mentioned, he's a former player, so he gets how it is. And to be somebody who's not above taking back constructive criticism and changing things around that, I think that's beneficial for this team going forward.
He did make some comments about that. And you mentioned the two ends of the spectrum where we saw what we saw from Griff for that approach to the Knicks. We know what we experienced under Jason Kidd and how much different that was. And Griff kind of talked about that, not Jason Kidd by name, but just that approach and what you have to do, what goes into weighing what it is your players come to you with. And I do want to get to some of those comments that he made post game and some of the transcripts that I have. We also have failed to mention thus far what Damian Lillard had done once again. So if you had any reservations over, I don't know, is Damian Lillard really as good as they say he is? Is he really this guy? I think we've seen now twice that those questions have been answered. So we'll get to that coming up next as well. But we do have to tell you some more about Prize Picks. We've all had less than enjoyable experiences when using other apps to purchase your ticket. Frustrations that you had, not sure where your seats were going to be, struggled with finding those tickets at the last minute, not sure where to even find any of the good deals. Well, none of those concerns you'll have when you use Prize Picks. You don't have to worry about when you're buying tickets to your next big event through Game Time, Don't have to worry about when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time, it's fast. It's the easiest way to buy tickets for sports, for music, for comedy shows. If you're going to the theater, all of it, all the tickets are available on Game Time. There's killer last minute deals. You can see your all in prices. You can even see views from where your seats and what it is going to look like, and the best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. So I mentioned my experiences that I've had in the past. I've used Game Time when I was in Detroit, as a matter of fact, to number one take in SummerSlam. Not Game Time through that, but went to a Tigers game, saw the rest of the city. I used Game Time. It was fast. It was easy. I knew exactly where I was sitting. I could see the seats. I knew what I was paying to get in the door as well. It was a more than enjoyable experience. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. That's Locked On NBA. Terms apply. Create an account, redeem that code, Locked On NBA, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So I mentioned, Camille, some of those comments that Griff made. The big ones were saying, just look, I got to listen to my players. He also pointed out, the funny thing is we had these conversations and this discussion over, look, we got to use Brook this way. And the way Griff worded it too, I didn't take it as the players saying, hey, we just got to play defense the way we used to, because I think there was still some incremental changes. And I would expect we're going to see more of those progress as the season rolls on. It was mostly just, I understand what you want to do. We can probably do that with four of us, but we have this 7-foot behemoth who is one of the best shot blockers in the game. We got to let him be him and play him back there. And, the way that Griff put it, the funny part was we had these conversations and we agreed this was going to be best to implement this. Oh, by the way, as Jalen Brunson and the Knicks come in a team offensively that is going to play a style that, as we've seen the past 5+ years, is not going to be conducive to the drop defense. So he pointed out, you're not going to win everything. So if you're going to take something away, you got to give it up. We knew that was going to be Jalen Brunson. We knew he was going to have a big game. It wasn't so much 45 points, but we knew we were going to be exposed to Jalen Brunson potentially doing that. But the fact that he kind of closed with this too and mentioned relationships. And this is what struck me the most. So for each game, when we go listen to Griff talk before the game and hear him afterwards on my post-game show, I'll take notes and transcribe what he's saying so I can reference it throughout the game or a post-game. And one of the last answers he gave was what struck me the most. It's about relationships. It's not just about being their buddy. It's about building genuine, authentic relationships and building on trust. Trust takes time, but it's also give and take. I trusted the players. They wanted to switch up the coverage, and they were right. There may be things that I say that are non-negotiables, but as long as you keep communication open, it's all about being approachable. I'm not always going to be right. You're dealing with some very intelligent players, and I would be foolish to not listen to them. But I want everybody on this team to have a voice, whether it's a veteran or a young guy. That doesn't always mean you're going to get what you want, but I've been on teams where I had that voice as a player, and I've been on teams as a player where I felt like I didn't have that voice, and it changes how you approach things. So I want guys, veterans and young, to have a voice on this team, and when we leave the room, we leave united.
That fits into the moniker that he's using the season Stronger Together, where it's an understanding that it's going to take all of us to achieve our ultimate goal of winning that championship. And to the point that he made in that quote, where it's like, some things are going to be non-negotiable, but if you can come to me and have a solid, reasoning behind it, I'm going to listen to it. And if it makes sense, then it makes sense. And I think that's the thing. It's even bigger than basketball, where it's just kind of like, people believe what they're going to believe, and Griff has a way that he wants to run this particular system. This is what he believes in. This is how he sees that this team can take away something. Because like you mentioned, no defense can take away everything. You have to figure out what you're going to try to eliminate altogether, and then what you can live with giving up a bit. And to your point about drop coverage, one of the first things I jotted down in my game notes was, oh, we're back in drop coverage. Dope. That's really cool to see. Oh, wait, we're against Jalen Brunson.
It's Jalen Brunson,
a guy who eats up drop coverages. Like, his game just fits that, because the way you beat a drop coverage is in that mid range. So pull-ups, middies, floaters, whatever you can do in that in-between space, knowing that they're not trying to give you anything at the rim and they're not trying to give you anything behind that three-point line. So you got to make your living in the mid range. And I know I saw some people pointing out like, oh, well, of course we gave up 45 to him. We have Dame out there. We have Beasley out there. And I hear you, but he also dropped 44 on us when we last played him with Drew Holiday out there. Like, he's a good basketball player. And like you mentioned, you can't take away everything, and his skill set fits into what you need to do to beat a drop coverage. But yet and still, the Bucks were able to walk out there with a win, even though they were out rebounded in that game, even though they gave up more points in the paint. Like, there are still some things to iron out. It's not perfect. And I don't want people to think that just because we saw Brook back in the drop that it means like, oh, all of our problems are solved, because there are still some things for them to tweak with, still things for them to work out. I think still some rotation things to consider here. But when you see that, 5 games into the season, he's like, I am not so stuck in my ways to say we're going to keep putting Brook out there to trap and push him further away from the rim, because we're seeing early returns and they don't work. So once you get new information to put into your computer system of your mind of saying like, okay, watching film, seeing how this works, this here isn't going to work. And it would be insanity for us to keep trying the same thing over and over, seeing the results aren't positive. So I love that, he took that into consideration and mentioned the fact that it's important for all the players to have a voice. Just because you're a vet or a rook, whatever it might be, you might have something that you can bring to this team and say like, hey, I know this X, Y, and Z. Let's try this out. Doesn't hurt to try it out. And it's the regular season. It's the first 2 weeks of the season at this point. Now's the time where you can try some things out. That's what the regular season is for. It's for figuring out combinations. It's for figuring out schemes as a new time head coach. It's for trying to see how versatile you can be, because we know in the playoffs, having a versatile bag is going to lend the most favorable results, because you can't defend every team the same way. Every team has different strengths, weaknesses, and it's on your coach to try to put the players in position to capitalize on those weaknesses to get a win on their side.
Yeah, and you mentioned Beasley specifically. It's going to be another big week for Bees, for Marjan as well. When you look at some of the matchups that the Bucks have coming up, which we'll get to in a moment, but you got a guy like Mikal Bridges, got Cade Cunningham, that I would assume we'll see more Marjan minutes on. Oh, by the way, Tyrese Halliburton. So a lot more wing and backcourt matchups that we'll get to see both of those guys utilized on in the upcoming games here. But that, to me, look. Not to go too long on Beasley, because I've seen some of the same comments. I think we all level set at the start of the year. He is not Drew Holiday. And right. Malik Beasley said that. Adrian Griffin said that from the start as well. We're not just going to replace Drew Holiday with one guy. But so far, 5 games in, I think Malik Beasley has been a willing defender. And I think we all kind of said from the start, I don't know if he's going to be your permanent starter, that maybe Marjan or somebody else develops into that, and he's best served as a scorer off the bench. But he's been a willing defender. And I think the big thing for me thus far was just as long as he is not a massive liability, where it gets to the point of you have some concerns with Dame and Malik Beasley it's worse than we imagined, then you're going to have problems. As long as he can just be an adequate defender, you should be fine. And I know it's very, very small sample size, but 5 games in, I think he's been fine.
Yeah, I can say he's been all right. He's been all right. Like you mentioned, we know what he is, and one thing you can't say about Malik Beasley is that he's not a willing defender. Like, he is active, he's moving his feet. It's just that, some defense is part effort, and it's also part what your what you talently can do. And like, he's not going to be Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday is blessed with just an innate ability to slide his feet laterally, that Beasley doesn't have. But Bees gives the effort. He's playing the passing lanes, which is something that Griff has, emphasized in this defense to try to create turnovers. He's active in that department. He's also been a willing rebounder when he can get by the rim. I was shocked. I think it wasn't this past game, but just seeing him attack, and I was like, okay, like, it's a group rebounding effort right now because Beasley's even out here grabbing boards, but he tries. I'm not sure if he's a long time answer at that starting spot, but I think he is somebody who can be a valuable contributor to this team.
We will get to one of the things that was, I guess, the negative, not to make this all glowing positives, but there was one area that continues to be an issue for this team, and it was really illuminated against the Knicks. We will get to that coming up. And Damian Lillard bails the Bucks out once again. We'll share our thoughts on that. Have to tell you about FanDuel, though. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. Yes, $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, spreads, player props, over-unders, you name it, all of that and more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on. That's LOCKEDON, and kick off this NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. So coming up tomorrow, Camille, I know you and Frank will have the post-game pod on the Brooklyn Nets game. So hopefully we see more of the adjustments that were made and we see that defense continue to round into form here. So you guys will break that down tomorrow night. But we mentioned at the top of the show, Damian Lillard does it again. And yeah, so he definitely, the presence was definitely felt opening night, where if I told you, hey, Dame had 39 points, yeah, that makes sense. If I told you after that game against the Knicks, 30 points for Dame, it was a very quiet 30 points by his standards. And you thought, really? Okay. It seemed like he and Giannis were kind of going back and forth a little bit early, but the fourth quarter, I mean, look, this is exactly what the Bucks have missed for the last 5+ years, at least when they were contenders, is that guy. And I think closer gets overused a lot, but Damian Lillard is every bit a closer. And the two things to me, Camille, not only his shot making ability and his ability to get off shots, but when you talk about free throw shooting, which again had been an issue for this team, Giannis was 7 of 10 at the free throw line, maybe for the first time in his career, baited a 3-point foul that I don't remember ever seeing that, and goes 0 for 3 on those free throws. But you see the importance of Damian Lillard, not only a guy that can get to the line at a high volume, he makes those shots at an incredibly high volume. He was the second leading free throw shooter by percentage coming into Friday night. But to me, the other big thing is, look, we've seen it with this team in the past. Getting open and making yourself available to get that pass is still very difficult. Where you think back to the Heat game, Bucks had a 5-second violation. We think back to the Heat playoff series. They didn't even get a shot off to close the elimination game. And we saw those issues of inbounding the ball. And a lot of times it was, if we don't have Giannis as the inbounder, we got to try to not get the ball to Giannis. Damian Lillard has no problem making himself free and available for that inbounds pass. And when he's fouled, you know it's 2 points. So to me, I was struck by, man, he got to 30 points, huh? And then as we were kind of calling the action and looking through the game logs, you thought, I feel like they haven't scored in a while. And you see Dame's 3-pointer, first basket or first points in a minute 45 seconds since Dame Lillard scored at the free throw line. And then he just did it again, where he ended up scoring 15 points in the quarter. And not only that, 15 of their final 16 points. I mean, you cannot overstate just how much of a closer he is and how different that is for your psyche to know we have this guy on our side.
It's wonderful to see, and the thing about that that really struck me is earlier in the game, you saw Dame trying to get to the rim and trying to draw those fouls, and the whistle wasn't coming. And it was kind of like, okay, maybe we need to kind of adjust. Like the whistles aren't going the way you think that they're going to be going. Like, how is that going to affect you? But Dame just kept coming. It's not as if he's going to be deterred by not getting that foul call. Like, he is going to continuously go at that rim and try to get a whistle, if not a basket, of course, first. But he doesn't shy away from it. He's not going to be like, oh, well, the first 2 quarters, this didn't work out for me. I'm just going to facilitate more or just, play off ball a little bit more. Like, he still wants those moments. And I love to see that in the fourth quarter, the Bucks put the ball in his hands. That's been one thing that personally I would like to see as an adjustment. It's just Dame having the ball in his hands a lot more than what he has had. Like, we brought in this dynamic point guard. Let's let him be the point guard, because we saw even early in the game, he's a willing passer. We know that. He averaged 7 assists last season in Portland. So we know that he can find guys and he doesn't mind making the right basketball play. It's not all about, like, I need to make sure I get my numbers. He wants to win the game. And outside of that, they mentioned it after the first time we saw Dame time in Milwaukee in the season opener, like, they just trust my decision-making at this time. When it counts, they trust the ball to be in my hands and to make the right play. And I think that is so important. And it goes beyond just scoring, although we need that as well. And it's nice to know that he has that ability in him. And it's so much better than what we've had before, where it's like, well, Chris Middleton is really our only shot creator. So if we need something, it has to go to Chris. And now it's like, we can put the ball in Dame's hand. He can create. He can use his gravity to create an open shot for somebody else. He'll find guys. Like, it just opens up so much more for this team. And to see him have the fourth quarter that he had when we needed every single one of those points because Jalen Brunson was on one as well, like, you're just thankful for it. And you understand why this trade was made, because you see these moments and you think forward towards the playoffs, which is where my mind always goes now, which, again, 5 years ago, this isn't how I thought about
and
this
I
Bucks
hope we
team.
get there. Right.
Yeah, but now it's like you think about, how will this translate into playoff basketball? We know buckets are harder to get when the playoffs come. We know how defenses tune in, and now it's a game plan against trying to take away your Dame and take away your Giannis. So it's like, how many reps can we build here during this regular season in various different ways, just so that when we get to the playoffs, we know how certain looks might look. It's not unusual. We have chemistry built up. And that's something else I want to see, is just, more ball in Dame's hand, more pick and roll with Dame, even not just with Giannis, because I didn't even think of this in the excitement of us getting Dame, but Chris and Dame pick and roll looked pretty good at points during this Knicks game as well. It's just so many different options you can use with him, and looking forward to the Bucks exploring that. But man, having somebody like Damian Lillard, where like, okay, it's crunch time, someone's not afraid of the moment, it's nice to have him on your side.
Yeah, and the last thing of realistically, what do we expect for when this team is gonna, I don't know if round into form is the right way to put it, but basically you have that comfort level, because for the last 5 years, we were very comfortable with this team. You knew what to expect. 2021 was a little different, where half the roster was new, very similar to this year, but your coaching staff was the same. And we saw some tinkering. That was the year they really started to explore switching a lot more as well. So that took some time. That was really around the All-Star break. The final game when Drew hit that game winner against the Memphis Grizzlies to go into the break was when it felt like now they're building towards something, and I feel like they've worked out a lot of those issues. I kind of expect the same this year, that it's going to take time. And we talked about what they've already done defensively with making some of those adjustments. I think you're going to continue to see that. I think they'll softly sprinkle in some of the things we didn't see, like the zones and everything else that Griff had done the first 4 games. It was basically drop that we saw against the Knicks. I think you're going to get to a point where there's a mixture of those, and maybe it just has to do with when Brook is on the floor versus not. But to me, the offense is going to be the biggest thing. That is the work in progress, because it's been a Giannis dominant offense. And you mentioned Dame needs the ball in his hands a lot more. Chris is still kind of rounding into form. You've added more shooters and more shooters that aren't just catch and shoot guys. And oh, by the way, the guy that was going to run your offense left a week before the season started. So I think the offense to me is the area that it really stands out. I know by the numbers, defensively is what we pointed to and said, man, this is a mess. But offensively is what stands out to me the most. Of this is really going to take some time for them to kind of develop that chemistry and round into form. And I just my advice would be, don't expect this to be a 20 game stretch or something like that. I know one of the last pods we did with Kane, he said, if you can go 6-4 in the first 10 games, it's probably pretty good for all the changes that we've had. And that's what they're on pace for.
Absolutely. And to your point about how defense has been the focus, one thing about that was that I think Marcus Johnson said during the broadcast of the Knicks game where he just was like, you can always go back home. Like, you can always go back home with that defense. And that's very true. But on the offensive side of the ball, this is all new. Like, there is nothing. I mean, you can go back to a Chris and Giannis pick and roll. You can go back to certain actions that you've run before in the past. But like, fundamentally, this offense is different. It's functioning completely different. So they're going to need a lot more reps. And I think when we acquired Dame, a lot of people, I know myself included, thought like, wow, like Dame meshes so well with Giannis. He's the type of point guard you would want. I think that this will, come together pretty quickly. But quickly is relative, right? Is quickly, a couple months? Is it a couple weeks?
Right.
But this team is going to be a little bit longer because, like you mentioned, in addition to integrating Dame into this, they did lose the guy who was running their offense right before the season. I'm sure they're still running some of the things that he installed, but now the guy isn't there to kind of help coach you through it. So it's a different scheme. So who knows? I did see that Griffin was reaching out to another assistant to possibly come on as a lead assistant. So who knows what changes might come from that. But overall, I just think offensively, they need reps. And I do get the staggering of Giannis and Dame, which when playoff time comes, I think is going to be outstanding to be able to have at least one of them on the court at all times. But in the regular season, these two guys also have to develop chemistry together. So I would love to see more reps of them together and using actions together, as well as, Dame with Chris, Dame with Brook. I do want to just shout out Marjan and Jay for having outstanding games against the Knicks. And if those two guys can be those types of players consistently, that helps out the Bucks a lot as well. So just kind of integrating all these different guys, I think that offense is going to take a little while, and they can lean on the drop for now if they want to, while they keep tinkering with other things and the switching and all that aggressiveness that comes with that. So yeah, I think we should probably start seeing this team really round into who they're going to be. I know this might sound far away, but like after Christmas, like around that Christmas game mark is kind of like when
it's
like,
okay, 25, 30 games in around then. And that's when you feel like we're mostly there and we're just kind of fine tuning now. Yeah. And look, your point too about Jay. Jay's been fantastic the first 5 games. It is night and day, the guy that he was. And I think a lot of it was scheme as well, but the guy he was that we saw last year, a lot of things, the scheme, the fact that he wasn't playing in NBA games, a major difference that we're seeing. And Jay's maybe been the unsung hero of these first 5 games. Marjan, to Frank's point of the only knock is somebody's got to teach him. Can you jump off the lead foot here and not just all these 2-footed power slides that we're seeing from Marjan Beauchamp? But 3-2 to start the season. And now, look, we said at the top a couple of days ago, there's no easy per se part of the early schedule. It's not what it was a year ago. It's not the most difficult schedule, but it's not where you're playing a lot of teams that maybe don't have hopes of the playoffs. The Pistons are a team that hopes to be in the play-in tournament. The Pacers are going to expect to be there. The Nets are. So you have a lot of those teams early, but you have those teams coming up now for a nice little stretch that are mostly like 7-11 is where they'll probably finish. So that should help as well in terms of trying to figure some more of these things out. That's the week ahead. We got the Brooklyn Nets on Monday, and then you get your first or your second back-to-back now with the Pacers and the Detroit Pistons. Camille and Frank will have the post-game of the Bucks and the Brooklyn Nets tomorrow night, and we'll see if the defense looks just as we saw against another New York team, or if we see a little more tinkering. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow.